everyone. Hello, all right. Okay. I'm just going to model what I do when I teach class. I'm going to put my phone on silent. Okay, all right, or just turn it off. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the third annual Asian Pacific American Writer Series here at PCC Southeast. And I know we have a couple classes here. It's great to see all of you here. There's a couple chairs in this area. If like someone's on the periphery thinking there's nowhere to sit, there's like 5 seats right there. So there you go. Feel free to take them. Welcome to the third floor of the library. Welcome to Cultures East 2017, and welcome to the third annual installation of what has become a really tremendous and much loved event here at PCC Southeast. I am Blake Hausman. I am the department chair of the English department here at this campus, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this event, and just wanted to say thank you for being here. I'll give lots of thanks before I introduce, or before I turn things over to our guest of honor in just a minute. I just want to say that we are indeed honored to have Kenji Liu, hi Kenji, with us here today as our guest of honor. Yes, all right. Kenji is a multimedia artist and highly acclaimed poet. He identifies as a 1.5 generation American, grew up in New Jersey, lived in Oakland, California for a while before moving to Los Angeles, and is now based in Southern California, in LA. And his book, Map of an Onion, which, just in case you're thinking right now, I need to get a copy of this book, and then at the end of the event, you're really going to think I totally need to get a copy of this book, is for sale right here in our bookstore. Yes, we have several copies for sale, so consider that at the end of the event. And perhaps you can get the author himself to sign it, maybe talk about it with you a little bit. This book, Map of an Onion, won the Hillary Grafendick Award for Poetry in 2015, and for good reason. The book challenges us to think about the complexities of how we map ourselves and how we are mapped within a transnational context, within a contested world, where the need to self-identify affirmatively, right, kind of has to navigate these tricky waters, if you will, of these tricky and tumultuous waters that involve legacies of linguistic and cultural colonialism. I just want to read something, and if you check out Kenji's website, kenjiliu.com, you'll see this statement from Juan Felipe Herrera, who is currently the Poet Laureate of the United States, about Map of an Onion. Herrera writes, "Colony, conquest, citizenship, language, place, the almost infinite severances of power and culture, ultimately a paper-cut theater. Here Kenji lays out the splicing of the onion. These blistering, translucent stacks of report, bilingual document, letters, notes, found materials, and calcified fever cells. These are investigations, surgeries, all crossing attempts to map some kind of in-between set of sears and wounds of, quote, advice and consolation, end quote. Applaud it for its tough, serious, exacting pen, and eye and mind for its howl, its losses, findings, and knife-thin metaphysical, peeling gestures. I am in true awe of Kenji's writing and poetics, and so am I." And here, Liu gives us a 21st century read at luminescent level, a groundbreaking giant, this collection. So before I turn things over, I just want to say thank you to the Cultures East Steering and Planning Committee. Folks are awesome. Thank you to the Southeast campus in general. Yes, I'll give a round of applause. Yes, okay, thank you to the Regional Arts and Culture Council for a project grant to help us put on this event. Thank you, of course, to the English department and the the pre-college and lower division college division here at PCC Southeast. And thank all of you for attending. Thank you, Kenji Liu, for being here. Thank you, Kenji Liu, for doing the work that you do and for being here to share it with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Kenji Liu.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Blake, and thank you again to PCC Southeast And especially to my hosts for the last couple of days, Blake, Jessica, and Beth, for kind of carting me around. And I broke out my rain jacket just to come to Portland, because I've only used it a few times in LA. So my jacket is very happy to be here. And yeah, so I'm here to, kind of give a reading presentation. And if any of you are writers and you do readings yourself, you might know that after a while, giving readings can feel like, oh, I just gave a reading, so now I have to give another reading. So I'm combining visuals with my reading, which is a new thing for me, and partly because I was asked to present some of my visual art with the literature part. So as Blake kind of said, the visual aspect is also really important to me in my writing, because for my day job, I'm a graphic designer. I'm one of those few people who, or one of those people who I would like to be teaching, but I don't know if I want to be teaching writing and then doing writing, because it's just too much writing. So I'd like to do something for my day job that's a little bit different than writing, but still art related. So yeah, I'll go into some of the visuals that go along with the writing. And so just to kind of contextualize and give an introduction to my work, I would say that maybe there are about 3 or 4 different major themes in my writing for the last maybe 2 or 3 years. One which is the subject of colonization, which is a subject that many people are familiar with, having come from colonized countries and being in a colony itself here in the United States. I grew up in New Jersey, as was said before, and in New Jersey was one of the 13 original colonies, as the song goes, that I was taught in grade school. And but what that actually meant to me as a person wasn't really clear until I became an adult, because my education about that colonial history was very, very vague, as it tends to be in the United States. We like to gloss over things like that. And even though I lived in an area of New Jersey where actual, Lenape Indian words were the place names for the towns and the rivers and etc., it just did not even occur to me that that actually meant something. And today I live in California, with very similar. There's a lot of Spanish place names left over from Mexico, and also indigenous place names, and I don't necessarily see that education being any better in California either, although it actually is a little bit more present. So colonization being one of my topics, kind of going along that is maps. So my book is called Map of an Onion, and that's very purposeful because I'm interested in maps and layers of maps. So colonization obviously creates a lot of layers in a place. In the actual physicality, the geography of a place, you have the land, you have the original inhabitants of the land and what they called that land, then you have the colonizers and what they call that land, and then sometimes all those things are mixed together, and they're a little bit hard to kind of pry apart. So I'm interested in how all of those things are kind of intersect in a single place, in my case, New Jersey, but also coming from a background being Japanese and Taiwanese, there's colonial history too. Japan colonized Taiwan between 1895 and 1945, and so Taiwan was part of the Japanese Empire. So all of those things combined together for my first book, Map of an Onion. The other theme would be documents. So how does a document, kind of a bureaucratic document, a government document, define the possibilities of what a person can do and not do, and what legitimacy do certain documents give you, and what do you do if you don't have certain documents. And I'll get into that a little bit more because documents is a big piece of my own kind of growing up. And then the third theme would be robots. So I was a big sci-fi fan back when I was a kid. I would go to the library and I would max out my library card and take out, 25 sci-fi books from the sci-fi section. I would go to maybe, I think I started from A and went to Z and that kind of thing. So sci-fi was a huge part of my childhood. So as I'll explain a little bit later, robots become a big kind of part of what I write. And then the fourth and last theme would be language and translation. I like to tell people that within my own family, because of this history of colonization and migration and immigration, that everyone, including me as being the most recent generation, for the last 4 or 5 generations in my family, each generation has been educated under a completely different language and completely different flag. So me, English. I grew up speaking Japanese as well. My mother's from Japan, grew up speaking Japanese, educated in Japanese. My father was born while Taiwan was part of the Japanese Empire. He grew up being educated in Mandarin Chinese, but he also comes from an ethnic group that has its own language, the Hakka. So he grew up with Hakka. And the Mandarin Chinese was actually kind of implemented after the mainland Chinese army came from China to Taiwan, escaping the communists. And then, so then my grandfather's generation in Taiwan spoke Hakka. So each one of us has been educated under a completely different system. So that's another aspect of layers for me, and also translation for me. And I'll get into some of that when we get into my more recent work that I've been doing. So, to start off, I have this quote up. You don't really need to read it. I just had it up there so that there's something to look at when you come in. But Teresa Hakkyongcha, anybody know who that is? Yes, the East Asians in the house would probably know. She's a really well-known Korean-American writer, one of the foundational kind of literary voices within Asian American literature. And she writes a lot about colonization, so I'm inspired by her, so I just put that quote up. And she writes a lot about how colonization creates those kinds of layers and identities that are very complicated, and you can't really put it into one category. All right, so let's get started. Being Born is Also a Ghost. So each one of these titles is from my book, so that's my cue to find my book and read something. Being Born is Also a Ghost is the first poem in my collection. If I can find it. Okay. So it's kind of an introduction to me. Being Born is Also a Ghost. Kyoto, Japan, which is where I was born. You're the snake. 4:12 p.m. A forest, river, and hospital. He looks me in the eyes. Between us, an engineer and a painter. He steeps in his first tangerine afternoon, takes leave of ghosts. I attend to his nascent day of migration. A bureaucrat's pen is an axe, is a wall. Even newborns have papers. Document in my hands, gold foil embossed, baby in a bowl cut. Like the dead, he has a country, but no shoes. I try to remember what matters. What time will his feet become mine? Down the street, a war temple built with stolen trees. What is the opposite of yes when no is forbidden? His mouth opens, words jump in, then a book, then a flag. I teach him to light a match and search for my face in his. So, has anybody seen the movie Lion? It came out pretty recently. Yeah, it's the movie about an Indian man who was adopted into an Australian family, and then he later uses Google Earth to locate the original village that he was born in, because he kind of was, his whole story is that he got lost, he was on a train, and then he couldn't find his way back, and then after he was adopted and became an adult, he used Google Earth to locate the exact place where he was from, and then went back there to find his family. So this is not that, but I'm kind of stalking myself. So I became interested in how I could use Google to find the places where I was from, where my family was from. My parents met in a particular church in Japan, and I said, well, can I find that church? And then I was born in a particular Baptist hospital in Japan. I said, can I find that hospital? So this is the closest I've been able to get to the hospital. This is the actual hospital I was born in. But, you know, Google Earth. It's like, how close can I get? How close can I get? Aerial view, aerial view. That's the closest I could get from above. Yeah. So we'll see a little bit more in a second. Prayer to the God of Documents, Sakyoku, Japan. So a little explanation. So when I was born in Japan, the laws at the time in Japan said basically that if your mother is Japanese but your father is not Japanese, that meant that you were not Japanese. So on my birth certificate, they said, you know, what's the baby's nationality? It says Republic of China, Taiwan. I'd never been there. So that's one layer of the document thing for me, which is interesting, how countries, how nations decide who is and who is not part of you. Prayer to the God of Documents. Even a baby is a paper-cut theater. A necklace of incisions strung together into a country is a filing system for breath. Though born of a suitable mother, he is a flock of trespasses, sharp edges folding inward from his father's passport. If he's worthy, may the red ink measures of this one-eyed world unwrap. Hurry him from the hospital through bloodshot evening, away from the uplifted noses of hounds. He is rain and rust, full of sea and its wide open, not a flag, or a reason, or treason. Let him sail across an octopus arm and recite fish sutras in your name, never to be a fist or any finger in it. Release him from all paper, that first wound commissioned to condense his unfolding life. So this is on the street next to the hospital. So I decided to, get on the ground there. And I'm trying to get close. So that's just a random person that's walking. And as you can see, that's the person again. And then half of that person, because, cameras are weird. So I'm trying to get close. Okay, I think I can get in from the side. Okay, here's like a delivery entrance. Here's a person. Here's like that person again. What's that?
Not like birth.
No. This is where the stork comes, like delivers the baby. In case you didn't know. And I was like, okay, can I look up into a room? How close can I get? No, that was about it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's the room I was born in, but.
Yeah, it was. That was it.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay. So, Search History is a poem that, first I'll talk a little bit. So, obviously I'm into maps, and search history is kind of a reference to, search history in a browser when you're doing a Google search. So this is Taiwan as a Japanese colony. All the place names in Taiwan have been given Japanese names. And of course, this is Japan, the empire. And then I was looking for the church that my parents were met in, and so I was trying to, where are all the churches in the immediate area around where I was born? So those are all the churches I could find, but I don't know which one is the right one. Okay, so I'm gonna play a little video. This is a video that I did of the poem. It's a video poem, and it's a collaboration that I did with a local LA band. And so the music is particularly good because it was a real professional band and not just some stupid thing that I found for free on the internet. So let me just pull it up. I chased their bright 20s in the church steeple of their youth. The shrine holds a factory of small wings. Zoom and inhale the traces of their hajimemashite in tides of traffic, rain, fish. The route he swings from colony to metropole, through dust of sugar and camphor. On the church camping trip, he makes eyes at a girl who later marries her guy. The night where he finally sees her. Street view of their first stroll after Sunday Mass, hands polite as warm summer wind. How she comes to love him, country boy, rising from the edge of her father's erstwhile empire into the heart. My eyes try to find them, columns of insistence scrolling through the underbrush. My shadow, a kaiju on their map. Their welcome, uncertain as yet. Ikimasureba, Ohoni. This search translated between my family's 4 languages, trying not to lose the feathered details of their tiny hand-drawn hearts. So I do a lot of video poems, or I haven't recently because I'm too busy, but I used to do a lot of video poems, and that's always a great way to get your work out there. So if any of you are writers, that's a good way to, get your work exposure if you do a good video of your poem, and it's kind of popular right now to do kind of video trailers for new books. Okay. I used to be a DJ, so I'm also familiar with audio equipment. A lot of things I do. So, in orbit around New York City. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I was in a town called Edison, which is about an hour south of New York City. And who knows why the name Edison is historically important? Yes, in the back.
Because Thomas Edison was from there.
Because what?
Thomas Edison was
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah. And what did he do?
Well, invent the light bulb, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but
That's part of the idea. I mean, like many people who get credit for things, other people did the work, but you know, he had some ideas. But being from Edison, you know, Mr. Edison is a big deal, and so I had to read a book about him and learn all kinds of things about this awesome person who had a lot of people to work for him and do things for him. So I wrote this kind of about my city, about Edison. Geographically speaking, Edison is a town that's kind of, it surrounds another town. So Edison is like a donut, and in the donut hole is another town called Metuchen. And Metuchen is an indigenous place name, which, you know, didn't even occur to me at the time when I was growing up there. In orbit around New York City, Edison, New Jersey. 8 stops from Penn Station. Unsuspecting universe unzipped. The leaning 4 o'clock sunlight, a warm bridge for my cheek. Nearest river in my atlas, an interstate that taught me to be an on-ramp. On the mantle, a book of Chinese inventions. A town named for the light bulb's daddy. Circled up round a burrow bearing a Lenape chief's name. Ghost maps are hungry maps. Over the decades, onion skins laid with scalpels, tributaries deveined, villages risen of dirt, maps stumbling from the bushes, after the farms, the woods, the Negro colony, the tracks, the burning crosses, the factory, the old tavern, Dublin, Sicily, Mumbai, Taipei, Manila. Every rest stop a borrowed word. Metuchen, Manhattan, Piscataway. Every word a buried world. Translucence, diffusion, frost. Every layer of history in a thing. Steel cotton lungs, the tight air, even under the suburbs, especially under the suburbs. So, more maps. There's a website where you can look at certain parts of the United States and see what they look like from the air decades ago, if they happen to have those in the record. So this is the exact neighborhood where I grew up, except in 1931. And you can see how it develops over time. It used to be farmland, and the forests are going away, Suburban development. So let's see, where's my house?
I think it's right here.
So I need to go back because I need to remind myself what I was going to read next. Right. A Sun Writes Back. So this is one of the earlier poems written for this book. And just to give some perspective, this is my first book, and I mean I had chapbooks, but this is the first full length. And most of the poems written for this book were created over about a 10-year period, which is not unusual for a first book of poetry. So I was very, very happy when it was finally out. And The Sun Writes Back is a response to a poem written by one of my ancestors. So when I was growing up, in the living room, there was a scroll hanging there with a bunch of Chinese writing on it, and I can't read Chinese, and I can't read ancient Chinese either. And I never really thought much about it. And then one day as an adult, I asked, well, what is that anyway, Dad? And he said, oh, it's just a poem written by our ancestor from 1250 BC. All right. So can you translate that for me? Not BC, sorry, AD. But can you translate that for me? Okay, sure. So this is basically what it says. Translating Chinese is not an exact art. One thing I should mention, this is a form called a Qilu, which basically means that every line has the same number of syllables and is a set number of lines. So I think in this case it's 7 syllables and 8 lines. So 7 syllables per line and 8 lines. Advice to the Liu family. That's the name of the poem. And the name of the person who wrote it is Gong Guang Chuan. It says, stay on course crossing borders. Uphold ethics where you dwell. Foreign lands will become home. Recall your parents' teachings. Every day burn fragrance to venerate your ancestors. Heaven bless the Liu household. Young men prosper together. And then I went to visit the town in Taiwan that my dad grew up in. We're lucky in that the town that he grew up in, there's actually an ancestral temple there for my family. So I can actually go to this temple and I can look at the names of every person in every generation in my family for the last 13 generations. Except the women, of course. Only the women who got married in. And it's interesting because there's a statue outside this temple. It's of a woman carrying 2 male babies. And it says, oh, that's the original woman who brought our family over from China to Taiwan. But in the temple itself, when you look at the names on the altar, she's not on there. It starts with the 2 babies, the 2 male babies. So this is me writing back to this poem. It's called The Sun Writes Back. After you, we crossed many borders. 800 suns turned. After you, a Pegasus landed 2 boys in Taiwan. Ma carried babies, but boys carried our name. The first compass. This bypass is our family, is our paddle. We live with barbarians who know not what they do. But the 3 principles twist us from sand grains into boulders. We crease and knot, compress and fold. A flower pressed inside of an encyclopedia still doesn't learn anything. 18 Liu generations exit mountains of Taiwan and enter malls of New Jersey. My papers state medium complexion, the threat level to their city on a hill. Our nest rests uneasily, chainsaw on an empty branch. Beautiful blues guitar place. You hold our first bold ashes, with salt-sodden lilac seas, steel-ribbed paper palaces, lulling my man heart to break. You set my rhymed house adrift, in the tides repeatedly, weeping like hands in old silk. The tired fronts of manhood, motley and unforgiving, I seek its soon destruction. We'll make a new heaven from long miles of broken fences, humble pigeon feathers, and an afternoon light in a jar. 100 lifetimes ending. So in the book, I had my aunt translate it back into Chinese, using the exact Kenji Liu form, which was an impossible task, so I have to thank her for that, and she thought I was crazy to ask her to do that. And if you notice, I have in here that my papers state medium complexion, the threat level to their city on a hill. That's another document story. So when I was naturalized as a US citizen, the document, the naturalization document, the person at the courthouse who was filling out the paperwork, had to fill out certain things: eye color, hair color, height, weight. At that time, I was probably about 3 feet high. But what's interesting is that there was a category on there, complexion. So the court person had to look at me and say, "What's this kid's complexion?" And this court person said medium. Which I've come to see as an interesting symbolic representation of the place of Asian Americans in the racial hierarchy of the United States. We are kind of considered to be medium. Medium threat, acceptable to many, but not all. But I am not a medium hamburger. And poem. So this marks the transition into, this is a poem in this book, but it kind of marks a transition into my newer work. Man poem is, you could say, is my attempt to make fun of manhood, certain versions of manhood. I don't watch sports. I don't really care about sports. I'm really bored by sports. And so that means that I don't have a lot of male friends. And so I just decided to make fun of this version of manhood. Man poem. Let's fold maps so our places can meet. My muscles have been everywhere. I should be at the batting cages. I should be cheering for America. I point at home and ride the other way. I should drink more cheap beer. A docile body is one that may be subjected, used, transformed, and improved. Real men win with knowing looks, with killer strut. I like them. I like to be them. Between these four corners, there's a catwalk. I show off my moves, up and down a graveyard of cheerleaders. I can fill every athletic cup with my cowboy theme park. Bricks and knuckles, sand and eyelids. This docile body can only be achieved through strict regiment of disciplinary acts. These are the battlefields I have built. Do you like what I've done with my craters? Department of Homeland Security likes them. Wants to be in them. I should be grilling chicken sausages. I should be wiggling my pecs. Oh, Hummer, let's find a smart car to flip. There are a lot of Hummers in LA. Let's watch the game so I can blow my new volcano. Ashes and lungs, sawdust and long, long tongues. So, I'm going into some of my newer work, and that's the transition because a lot of my newer work is about masculinity. I think there's a real need for people to dissect masculinity, and especially toxic hypermasculinity. But this one is about my grandfather. So, portrait of grandfather as a cowboy. So, there's this thing in Japan, if you might have heard in the last poem I read, I referred to Cowboy Theme Park, which will fill my athletic cup with Cowboy Theme Park. So a mentor of mine told me, why don't you explore that a little further? So I did research into cowboy theme parks, and there are many in the United States actually, but I found one in Japan. And this is actually a ghost amusement park in Japan that used to be, a cowboy theme park, and is now, a ghost town. And these are photos from a website about it. And this is one of the many attractions. Mount Rushmore at, I don't know, like 1/18th scale, or I don't know exactly. So here's our beloved, what's his name? No, John Wayne, yeah. I'm not good on cowboy mythology. John Wayne as an android. So you might have seen the reboot of the TV series, the movie Westworld. So it's very similar, but this was before Westworld. His 5-pack in his belly. Nice hair, falling apart. Okay. So, portrait of grandfather as a cowboy, Western Village, Hakkyo, Tochigi, Japan. All your life you aim at the national sky. You tell yourself you don't suffer. You puff away days in a saloon, seated before a single persimmon beyond ripe. Summer, we fly thousands of miles to be your cigarette. Your 6-cylinder heart blows and blasts, eyes and neck stuttering, a moon-crazed owl. You drawl in lazy Japanese. Chiaruzu, erebisu, kurinto, maririn. By the way, those are Japanese versions of the names Charles Elvis Clinton, Maryland. Glittering the air with carbon and menthol flitter, the animatronic flag. Salute, America's ghost in your exposed hydraulics and fields of rock-headed presidents. A republic of bees under the scalp. So another interesting thing about this is that in this park, there's a fake US-Mexico border. And on the other side is kind of like a Mexico-themed area. And you can go to the Mexico-themed area, look back across the border to the United States, and on the US side, there's US flags with targets on them. And you can shoot from the Mexican side at these US-American flags. Make of that what you will. Okay, so a little bit more. So as I mentioned before, robots are a thing for me. And what I mean by that is, after this first book, I said, can I just find some new ways to write instead of having to just drag my brain out and try to find something in there? So I decided to see if I could include other voices, if I could get stuff from other places. And does everybody know what the I Ching is? The I Ching is a divination system, an ancient divination system from China. It's kind of like Tarot, or I don't know, all those other divination systems out there. And you can get an online I Ching reading from various websites for free, as you can with Tarot and all these other things. So I decided to start asking the I Ching questions and seeing what it had to tell me about various things. So here are some of the questions I asked it. Who is responsible for the suffering of my mother? Who is responsible for the suffering of my father? What were my ancestors' rituals for dying? What did my ancestors leave behind? What is the legacy of World War II in my body? Who are my ghosts? Tell me about the sound of my mother's voice. What will it take to destroy white supremacy? What is the best way to destroy capitalism? What will it take to destroy patriarchy? Am I a real man? What is the legacy of colonization in my family? What do I least want to remember? How does heteropatriarchy live on through me? For what do I not have the words yet? So the I Ching is the wording of the I Ching, the translations into English are very, very patriarchal. It's a very it's based on Confucianism, and so there's very specific understanding of how a family should function and how family members should relate to each other and genders should relate to each other. So I decided to ask the questions that I can't really answer, like how do I take down patriarchy? Well, why would a patriarchy infused online computer divination system tell me the answer to that? So I would take the answer that it gave me, and then I would kind of pick out stuff from it that I was interested in. And like I told you before, my family has 4 languages in it. So I would go to Google Translate, stick it in there, translate it from English to Chinese, then from Chinese to Japanese, and then from Japanese back into English. And by then it was thoroughly fucked. So this is just an example of that earlier poem in English. I stuck it in, it gave me nonsensical Japanese, nonsensical Chinese, and back into English, where it almost makes sense. We will adhere to in the end cross-border. It protects ethical issues of your life. I will be home in a foreign land. Remember your parents' teachings. Burning smell every day. Do you like your ancestors? God bless Liu. Young men and prosper. It's almost correct. So I'll read you one of those poems. Dear I Ching, who is responsible for the suffering of my father, and that is. Dear I Ching, who is responsible for the suffering of my father? And this one's after Banu Kapil, who's a poet I greatly respect. Some of these questions were taken from her first book. Banu Kapil asked a series of questions to South Asian women and then took their responses and created new poetry out of them. So her question, who is responsible for the suffering of my mother, is her question. So I changed it to father for this one. Who is responsible for the suffering of my father? Assume successful imitation, not a haunting. A faithful implementation of the source. In order to have glorious direction, in order to establish a fruitful prince, careful not to let live certain sentiments. In the disintegration of this dwelling, a growth of hollows unlike any other, weaving warp and weft. A firm hand is the birth event of all useful things. A manly sediment for passage between heaven and earth. Growth refers to overflow, filling in the following manner. Monetization of even the disordered. Reference the birth of 10,000 things, the market of confusion. Confusion is obvious. You do not know. This is not a haunting, but a template from before. So obviously the I Ching doesn't give very easy answers, as it should not for a complicated question like that. Okay, so this is the final part of what I'm presenting. So I moved on from the I Ching thing, but I still wanted to use computers somehow. And Frankenstein, we all know who Frankenstein is, more or less. Frankenstein, the character who was kind of constructed out of dead body parts and then jolted with electricity to come back to life. I became interested in collage, in erasures, basically in finding ways to kind of pull things from different places, mix them together, and creating something new out of it, kind of like with the I Ching thing. And so I developed this way of generating new work for the next manuscript that I'm kind of shopping around right now, which is called Frankenpo, which is short for Frankenstein poem. And basically what I do is I take at least two texts, sometimes one, but I take two sets of text, could be anything, newspaper article, opinion piece, academic text. I put it in this, there's a website called textmechanic.com. If you are a writer, you should write that down because it's super useful. Textmechanic.com, and it'll separate out all the words for you, and then It can randomize them for you. It can change everything from uppercase to lowercase. It can, do all kinds of things to your text. And so I would mix these two texts together, and I would start chopping away at it to see what remained or what was interesting out of what happened. So yesterday in Jessica's class, I led the class through a related exercise using a page from a bird, it was a text about birds in Arizona. It's a very kind of pastoral language. And then the other text was a section of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which, if you don't know, is the act that basically banned all Chinese from coming to the United States for a number of decades. Very, very, very similar to some recent things coming out of the White House. So that language is very official, kind of therefore and you shall and that kind of stuff. And then we mixed the two together. Came out really interesting. So I call it Frankenstein because I'm kind of going into old documents like this and kind of chopping them up, and it's kind of macabre and bloody, whatever, but it's kind of like compost, if you prefer the more kind of organic method. I know I'm in Portland, so I'm sure compost is very familiar. See what comes out of it. Or taxidermy, if you prefer. That's another, there's a thing called rogue taxidermy where people take parts from other animals and put them together and create new animals out of it. Very, very strange and disturbing, but it's a good metaphor. So, what was I going to read from that? Nothing. Well, I'll just pick something. Oh, well, here's my definition. It's an invented poetic form by me. To create a new poetic text by collecting, disaggregating, randomizing, rearranging, recombining, erasing, and reanimating one or more chosen bodies of text for the purpose of divining or revealing new meanings often at odds with the original text. So the example that I read yesterday in class was one where I took stuff from Star Wars, and I'll read that one and then one more. So this one is a Frankenpoe combining, okay, this took a little explanation yesterday. Okay, so who's seen Star Wars episode, 3 through 5? The original Star Wars. Okay. And who has seen Star Wars 4 through 6, and then who has seen episodes 1 through 3? The shitty Star Wars. Yeah. Okay. So the only thing that's not shitty about the 1 through 3 is that there's this great speech in episode 3 where, the senator who is kind of like the leader of the Galactic Senate, we're witnessing his transformation into the evil Emperor Palpatine, who shows up in episodes 4 through 6. So after his transformation into the evil Emperor Palpatine is complete, he goes to the Galactic Senate and announces, "I'm your emperor now. We're an empire. Democracy is stupid." And that's what's going to happen. And so I took the speech that Emperor Palpatine gave, which is a great speech. I combined it with our current lovely president's inaugural speech, which was equally lovely speech. And then select the dialogue from, Star Wars episodes 4 through 6 involving the Emperor and diabolical things. And came up with this thing that I'm going to read in a second. Empire Strikes. So the first line is a line taken directly from the movie. Citizens of the civilized galaxy, on this day we mark a transition. Billions of helpless factors wind us into blinding black-gloved sparks. The pain constantly beautiful, omnipotence ripped by a giant Jedi abyss. Great ears of the people stolen, deathly half-governors and bureaucracy, that unstoppable depletion. Nation of my gracious physiognomy. Once we prospered entire every fiction time. Our last infrastructure collapses. We sink wicked, a feeble station, infused by a never-ending crawl. Our regions are semi-darkness, with scarred and weak edges, groans along our peace borders, ripped, scattered, dimly white. Against the reaped verdict, stormtroopers ignite. My dark hood star attacks, Lord I. Your unbearable boy emperor. My force fictitious flashes out, unstoppable bleed. My carnage grown from exaggerated disrepair. 7 foot tall in the well of a mob. Toward a cold room, our body staggers. And yes, I pledged to uphold the Constitution and all that. So, I'll just read one more. I'll end on kind of a lovely note. So this is another Frankenpoe, and this one combines. Okay, so in Japan, there's an interesting form of gender, third gender, basically called genderless danshi. So basically, in this case, it means that there are people who identify as men, but they've decided that they don't really need to dress like men, that they can dress however they want, which is great. And so they dress in what would be considered to be a feminine way. They still consider themselves to be men, but they just dress like women or whatever it might be. And but they're called genderless danshi. I don't know why they're called genderless exactly, but so there was an article about this recently, and I took that, I combined it with a Buddhist sutra, which is the Metta Sutra, which is a sutra on loving kindness. It's a meditation on loving kindness. And the third thing I combined it with is the screenplay of the animated movie from 1982, The Last Unicorn. I'm glad to see that something from 1982 has such a strong impact. This one's called Drowsiness Through My Kiss. Ill will crashes you midnight long. A nearby night voice hews your skull with giggles. Purple-tipped roads escape the ceramic mountainside. A lone caw answers the smoke blue blush. Dream easy. A country is a love husk deception in a demon bottle. A baggy masculinity, a mad gizzard black and blue from gender. In the tall morning, again, it comes fondling your wild inside canvas. Up the forest lunges, moans a shaking beard, spits a sitting body spreading his trousers. You bull moon, you skull prints rolling for miles, you high-heeled express in a pure-hearted gender jacket, in satin boy kneecaps and a skinny pink unicorn suit. You return to dusty body you, your back barbed with his dark-suited anatomy. You powder king lays the prettiest voiceover lipstick could ever kill. You have lion ears tonight, knowing the balcony crumbles behind you. You swiftly human flag. You see forever that serpent you annoyed. But this morning body you enter is a long red sparkle. And the moon still protrudes above, a purring one-eyed wonder. See, clumsy love still runs something. Okay, I lied, I'll just read one more, and then I'm done. Because I just love reading this one. It's another Franken poem, but it only has one source, and that is the movie Purple Rain. As many of us know, Prince, the anniversary of his death was recently. And this is probably one of the sexiest poems I've ever written. Because it's Prince. And he's hiding from me. So again, every word in here is from the movie, just rearranged. I have a temporary title for it, Descending Throttle Early Savagely. He's a beautiful bird again, desperately funk, tornado gorgeous, heart thick with furious glide, and me his dessert. A conspiring body of heavy love, a whole dusk package. He sits and moistens, a ripeness in him, black as sobs. Glisten he rises, a burning of bites and roses, a flushed, trembling hollow across his lush. See his national pouty lip, a skin-tight, slightly welling back door swinging all piano wide. His bikini simmers, his cheeks jump, honey face staring wickedly over lustrous flower shoulder. He crushes my diamonds, stains my quiver on the spot. I muzzle his leopard face. The night furrows its savage purple coat, waters my sleeping moonlight Cadillac. Drowning looks like light to swim, meaningless. Here, lustrous racked chrome, passport of spandex lips. His pompadour bird, plunging into my wild Minnetonka. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenji. Thank you, everyone. We would now like to turn things over to some Q&A with the audience. So I'm just curious if anyone has a question for guest of honor. Yes.
So I know you studied post-colonial studies. Was there a point where you thought that maybe not doing it specifically creative line of education that was taking too much time away from your art?
Okay, yeah, for those who didn't hear, the question is that my education, my graduate education was in anthropology and post-colonial studies. And was there ever a time where it felt like that kind of academic work was taking away from my art? No, because actually I felt that my studies were feeding my art. And the reason for that, I'm a huge fan of a really wide humanities education and social studies and history, etc. Because I think it makes people better writers. I do not have an MFA, and I'm not planning on getting an MFA, but I know from my friends who have MFAs is that a lot of times that that education is very technically focused on writing, and a lot of times people don't get that wider kind of education, which means that how are you going to write about the world but not have an education about the world in terms of critical thinking or wider understanding of how to think about it. So for me, anthropology and post-colonial studies specifically was giving me the tools to think about our world, giving me the tools to think about all the things that have led to our current moment: colonization, imperialism, racism, sexism, capitalism, all these things that we live with every day. And are, how am I going to write about those things if I don't have that kind of background to it? And also a lot of the scholars in post-colonial studies, and it's true of almost any field, gender studies, etc. A lot of times they're trying to write and think about things that are difficult and possibly there is no language for it, because you're trying to think outside of the box, so you have to invent new ways to think about it. And so a lot of these scholars, their writings are very poetic. They're very innovative in terms of form and language. So I found it extremely inspiring for my creative work. And still turn to those thinkers now to think about my poetic work, to try to give it more depth.
Do you have a microphone to bring to someone with a question? Here, let me bring the mic back here.
As a graphic designer and a poet,
You don't need, who needs a microphone?
and a poet, what advice do you have for others going out into the field as a writer to make a living in their art?
Well, I have a friend here who's trying to do just that, who graduated from USC with his PhD in literature, English, and creative writing. So he may be the better person to ask about that, although I don't know, you might be depressed if you hear his answer. But for me, like I said earlier, it is important to have a form of money work that is a little bit different from the writing, because I don't want to burn out on the writing. If I had to do writing for a living, then I wouldn't want to do my creative writing. Teaching, on the hand, is a little bit different, because you're not writing, you're doing other things. So I might be able to do that. But for me, graphic design is a great way to make money, and be doing something creative still. But I'm not burning out on the writing part of it, and I can still go home and feel like I'm doing something different now instead of a continuation of what I do at work. And then I still write when I'm at work too. Don't tell anyone, but I mean technically everything. I work for the University of California, Riverside. So technically, I don't know, everything I do on their computers, they probably own, because you have to sign that agreement. But don't tell anyone. I do it on Google Docs. So it's in the cloud, it's not on their computers, so I don't know, I could probably argue something.
What are some of the elements of your writing process?
Tea, a lot of tea. A lot of going to cafes, a lot of getting together with other writers and shit talking about writing and writers. And because I deserve it. And for me, I've set up a schedule for myself. It's different for everyone. But for me, I found that there's this kind of informal online group called The Grind. And basically what it is that you commit to writing every day for a month. And they put you together with a group of people. And the only commitment you have is to write something every day and send it to this group. It's not a workshop, they're not providing feedback or anything like that. It's just accountability. You write something every day, you send it to this group, and somebody witnesses it. And that's been extremely helpful. And when I say I write every day, I don't mean I write like 5 pages every day or a book every day. I write a sentence every day. I write half a sentence. I write 3 words that go together very interestingly that day. and I send it in. But by the end of the month, I have 30 days worth of that, which when combined, like Voltron, becomes something interesting. So that's my approach, is just chip away at it little by little. I know a lot of people feel that you have to sit down and just something great has to come out or something like that. That it does sometimes. But I find that as you get into writing and maybe are in the field for a while, I think for me, I realized that writing is hard, boring. I don't want to do it sometimes. It's like, but you have to do it. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. If I do it once a day, I brush my teeth for that day, for that morning. I don't know. Some people brush twice, 3 times a day. I brush once a day. I don't know if that's good or not. So, whatever works for you. But a habit, a schedule is good.
So, we were watching a video, we were talking about how do you design it as a paying work, so that, not that you're not making money already, but it's not the main way.
Mhm.
So that you could not have that press of a commercial, like fingers pushing down on you, you could be more free, right? But I'm curious because language sometimes feels like it's already been used for so many other things. If you do feel like there is some other thing pushing down on you, like is there a constriction or some sort of force where you feel like you're responsible to produce a certain kind of thing? Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's a complicated question. It's not commerce that's driving you necessarily, but there's some other onus that you feel is.
So, kind of in another way to maybe phrase the question is what motivates me to write?
Since you don't have to think about commerciality, but then you probably feel responsible for some other thing.
Oh, yeah. But not necessarily in a bad way.
No,
Okay,
not
yeah.
necessarily, but it will shape you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I don't see my writing as being for everybody. I don't see my writing as being something that should sit in Barnes and Noble and some random person who knows, who doesn't care and maybe hasn't read much poetry is just going to pick it up and understand it or like it right away. That might sound elitist, but I know who my audience is, and that's really important to know who your audience is. So for me, I feel like I'm writing for people who, well, as soon as I say who I'm writing for, it's going to narrow it down too much. But I know that I'm most grateful when I hear from people who read my work, who find that, this might be obvious, but who find that it has helped them think about their own life in some way, and help them realize something about their life that, is significant and will help them going forward with whatever. And so that comes from a lot of different corners. It comes from scholars who are interested in my work in an intellectual way. It comes from people who are activists. It comes from people, who are just randomly pick up my book in the store, and for some reason they like what I wrote, and even though they're not necessarily from my background or whatever, they can relate to it because it's about something that impacts them. It impacts them because they're from a formerly colonized country, or because they're a person of color, or because they grew up in a suburb, or whatever. Like people who grew up in suburbs, we have a lot of work to do to dig under the suburbs and find out what the bones are there. Because there are a lot of bones under the suburbs. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I know you briefly touched on your writing process, but I wanted to ask, how is your writing process for creating visual art similar and different from your process for poetry?
That's a good question. There are some ways in which doing visual art and writing are similar for me, because I'm a visual thinker. So that means for me, even when I'm writing, I'm thinking visually. So I'm seeing shapes, I'm seeing colors, I'm seeing things that connect, even if they're words, I have an association that's visual for them. So that's kind of how I think about my writing. And with visual art, it's not something that I have a specific process for. I just kind of do it intuitively. But usually what focuses me is, the goal or the purpose of whatever it is that I'm creating. So, for example, there's this piece, which I created to go along with a very long poem that was about Godzilla. And because Godzilla is an interesting character, right? Because he was woken up from his long sleep by an atomic bomb. So he's a representation of the modern forces of warfare and science that have, negatively impacted people. And for me, as somebody whose family comes from Japan, I felt that it was important for me to comment on the atomic bomb. And this is something that I just put together because I felt, okay, first I'll start off with the mushroom cloud, because that's an obvious representation of the bomb. But then I get symbolic with it because I'm like, well, how do I feel about the atomic bomb? Well, I feel like even though it happened before me, that it still has tentacles that reach out through my family, through history, into me. And that it still impacts how I see life and how I live life, even though I was not directly impacted. So, I kind of feel it out like that. And I think in writing, I probably do something similar. Any other questions? Yes?
What do you think is the role of art in politics, and have your ideas changed during this new administration?
That was a good planted question. So, what is the role of art in politics? Wait, rephrase it again. What is the role of art in politics, and how has it changed under this new administration? Okay. I think art and politics are, for me, they're exactly the same thing. Of course, it's possible to have art that's relatively free of politics, but I think that even art that claims to be free of politics is having a political position itself. Claiming to be free of politics is a political position. So for me, I choose not to, pretend that my work is somehow apolitical or anything like that. Which reminds me, I live in Monterey Park now, which is just outside of LA, and it's mostly Chinese, Vietnamese, used to be Japanese, and there is a park there, like a water fountain, and then at the top of the water fountain, there's a statue of the Greek goddess Athena. And recently, an Asian American artist decided to make a version of the Greek goddess Athena with a Chinese face, and asked the city council to put it up there next to Athena, not permanently, but just temporarily, just to make art and make a statement, because Monterey Park is mostly Chinese. And the city council refused, and the mayor said, no, I think art should be free of ethnicity. So Athena is free of ethnicity. Okay, I see what you're saying here. I know what's happening here. So, that whole claim of neutrality is, for me, a piece of bullshit. As far as the new administration and he who will not be named, no, it hasn't changed. I guess it has changed in the sense that I feel even more responsible to be more political and to be an even bigger pain in the ass as much as possible, as much as an artist can be. as a writer can be. And, you know, it's not like the stuff that I'm doing is bringing the FBI down on me or anything. I mean, I wouldn't know if it was exactly. Anybody here from the FBI? Cool. So yeah, in a way, I feel more responsible because as an artist, I think I have, even at the kind of relatively low level that I'm at, I'm a public figure. And a public figure has a responsibility to the public. And in other countries outside of the United States, a lot of times writers are extremely important as intellectuals and public figures. And the US is one of the few countries where that doesn't happen very much, and I think that's really annoying. And it says something to me about the United States and education and empire and all these other great things. But I think that more artists do need to be more political or explicitly political with their work, and whatever that looks like for them. I'm not, you know, giving a directive about how that should look, but it should be challenging in some way. It should be dangerous in some way, or at least that's the way that I'm challenging myself to look at what I'm doing, and that's my challenge to other people too. That it should be dangerous in some way. Because if he's going to take away NEA funding eventually, we might as well use what we have and just, you know, get it all out there. Because even if it's not funded, it'd be great if it was funded. So, I'd like a grant. Thanks.
I have one more question, and maybe we can wrap it up with this. Although, was that a question over there?
Yes.
Go ahead. Why don't you ask your question first, and then I'll follow up maybe with one more.
Hi there. An interview, not this time. You said writing can be a decolonizing practice. That means you.
Writing can be a decolonizing practice. So this is the thing about becoming a public figure, is that things you say come back, which is why I could never be a politician. Yeah, I do think that writing can be a decolonizing act because at least for me, okay, so for some people, writing is a therapeutic act, right? Which is great. And the reason why that's great is because it forces you to think about your life and other people's lives in a new way, because you have to tell a story about it. And in order to be a responsible writer, you have to think about how you're going to do that responsibly. And if you're going to do that responsibility, you have to think about the world, and you have to think about the social issues in the world. And then ideally, this doesn't always happen, the writer has to think about their place in the world and how their responsibilities intersect with what they're writing about. Now, I'm not saying that every writer does that, because clearly they don't. But for me, I think I use it as an opportunity to think about, well, if I'm going to write about gender, what is my responsibility as a cisgendered male when I'm writing about gender? I could be really irresponsible, and I could probably get a book deal out of it. People have. But I'm not in that camp. So what's the best way for me to do that? Well, probably the best way for me to start would be to question my own gender and to question the messages that I've received about it. So then that's a process of thinking about how I was created and thinking about the messages that I've gotten about gender, about being male, which forces me to think critically about it, which means, hopefully, I'll start questioning some of the things that I've learned about gender that are no longer useful or that don't make sense or are completely false about gender. So that's what I mean in terms of decolonization, because I think we have to look at the messages we've gotten about our race, our gender, our everything, and find out what's true and what's not, and find out the history of these things, and find out how we fit into these things and what responsibility we have as people in these positions. You know, as a male, I have some power that comes from being males, and if I say something about gender, somebody will probably listen to me and not my girlfriend. So, and if a white person says something about race, somebody will probably give them a cookie and not me. So, you know, it's an important process to think about, why does that happen? What are the power relationships involved? How is our society structured where that happens? And what can we do to change that up a little bit, hopefully, from whatever little corner that you're in. So that's what I mean.
Good questions. Thank you, Kenji. One more question before we wrap it up and encourage people to maybe come say thanks and so long and all that good stuff. I think it's kind of traditional for us to ask this question at the end. You alluded earlier to how difficult work it is to write, and how sometimes just one sentence or 3 words is enough for a day. And of course, we have students here who are taking writing classes, composition classes, and some students here and who are going to be watching this video. Perhaps online classes or something like that in the future, who envision themselves as future writers, as future artists, right? And so, I don't know, what advice or what suggestions would you offer to those of us here who want to write? What would specifically, what would you suggest are good things for students who want to write? Not just to write papers in classes, and of course you got to write your papers for your classes, right? But beyond that, right? For the long haul, is there some advice that you might give us, or a couple things for us to think about going into the future?
I think for me, I mean, I can give fairly standard answers to that question, like you need to read as much as you can, read as widely as you can, that kind of thing, which is, I definitely think all writers need to read widely. But I think in recent years, what I've come to realize is that community is a huge part of writing. Even though writing is kind of a solitary act, that without the support of a community, I can't do what I'm doing. In a lot of ways, not just, I could say, well, I need community because I want you to buy my book. But also, for me, as an Asian American writer, as a person of color, as a writer of color, I find that the support for my voice and my stories is not very strong in this country. And where it is strong, it's very stereotypical what kinds of stories are supported. And if they exist at all, a white person is playing them in the movie. Thanks, Matt Damon. Emma Stone. So, because of that, it's important for there to be a community of support that helps you and tells you that what you're doing is important, and tells you that, just to keep going. And also provides resources, opportunities for workshops, for getting together and talking with other writers, and again, getting writers together to talk shit about writing is definitely one of the best things ever. We don't actually do any writing, but we love to talk shit about writing and writers, and that's part of the support. And even if you're not, a person of color, etc., that community aspect is important, because I think the accountability is important. People can be an individual artist, individual writer, make it on your own, but I don't think that's reality for the most people. And so, especially if you're from a community where your voice is not particularly valued in this country, that support is extremely important for me. And I say that partly because there's a couple people in the audience from the Kundiman community, which is the Asian Pacific American organization that puts on writing retreats every summer, and that's been incredibly important for me because I have a ready-made audience of cheerleaders who, anytime I do something, they're going to go, woo, yeah. So that, I think, is the biggest piece of advice, is to find your peers and to find the people who will support what you're doing and understand what you're doing. Because sometimes you think you're going to get that in a writing class or a writing workshop, but that's not necessarily the best place for it, because that's just a random assortment of people who may or may not understand what you're trying to do. I mean, there's a difference between legitimate critique that helps you improve as a writer, technically speaking, but then there's the questions and feedback that actually is not helpful at all because they don't understand what you're doing, they don't understand your cultural background, they don't understand your use of language, etc. So finding that peer group of people who will get your back and also push you at the same time to improve your writing, because you also need to make sure that you're not staying still and not improving your craft and thinking that what you're doing is good and fine. No, you should always be improving. So you need somebody who will just tell you, no, that thing you just wrote needs a lot of work. Or that shit stinks. You know, you need somebody who will tell you that, otherwise you're gonna go in the world thinking you're awesome, and everybody around you is gonna be like, that person thinks they're awesome, but their shit is so bad. And you don't wanna be that person. So, on that note, thank you.
On that note, thank you so much, everyone. Can we have one more round of applause for this? And again, we have copies of Master Menu for sale here. Feel free to follow the lead, and we have the space here for like another half hour. So feel free to ask questions and enjoy the rest of this fabulous overcast